CEO told a black farmer's daughter to try fixing the machine, had no idea who the girl's father was. The black SUV kicked up a cloud of red dust as it rolled into Millbrook, a town so small that if you blinked while driving through, you'd miss the rusty water tower and the single gas station that doubled as the local grocery store. Nathan Blake adjusted his Italian silk tie and grimaced at the sight of his polished shoes already collecting dirt through the open window. This wasn't exactly the kind of place where a CEO of Agritech Solutions typically spent his Tuesday afternoons. "Sir, we're here," his driver announced, pulling up to what looked more like a glorified warehouse than a state-of-the-art manufacturing facility. Nathan stepped out, immediately feeling overdressed in his $3,000 suit among the cluster of locals who had gathered for what his PR team had dubbed a community engagement tour. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was here to show off technology to people who probably couldn't afford to buy a single component of what his company produced. "Mr. Blake, welcome to Millbrook." A nervous-looking plant manager named Henderson rushed forward, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. "We're so honored to have you visit our facility." Nathan forced a smile and shook the man's clammy hand. Behind Henderson stood a mixed group of about 30 people, plant workers still in their uniforms, a few local business owners, and surprisingly, several families with children in tow. The kids ranged from toddlers clinging to their parents' legs to teenagers trying to look bored while secretly curious about the fancy city man who just stepped out of a vehicle worth more than most of their houses. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathan began, his voice carrying the polished confidence of someone who'd given this speech 100 times before. "Thank you for taking time out of your day to see what Agritech Solutions is doing right here in your backyard. We're not just a company. We're partners in building America's agricultural future." A few polite nods rippled through the crowd. Nathan noticed how the workers' eyes seemed to look everywhere except directly at him, while their children stared openly with the unfiltered curiosity that only kids possessed. "Now I know what some of you might be thinking," Nathan continued, warming up to his practiced routine. "What does a company like ours really know about farming? Well, let me show you something that will change your mind forever." He gestured dramatically toward the warehouse doors, which Henderson quickly scrambled to open. Inside, bathed in carefully arranged LED lighting that made everything look like a high-tech showroom, sat what looked like a cross between a tractor and a spaceship. The machine was sleek, silver, and covered in more sensors and digital displays than the cockpit of a commercial airliner. "Behold," Nathan announced with the flair of a magician revealing his greatest trick. "The AgriMaster 3000, the future of precision farming." The crowd shuffled forward, a mixture of genuine curiosity and polite obligation moving them closer to the imposing machine. Nathan could see dollar signs in some of the adults' eyes, while others looked like they were mentally calculating how many months of mortgage payments the thing probably cost. "This isn't just equipment," Nathan continued, patting the machine's side like he was introducing a prized racehorse. "This is artificial intelligence meets agricultural wisdom. Soil analysis, weather prediction, crop optimization, all controlled by quantum processors that can make farming decisions faster and more accurately than any human ever could." A few impressed murmurs arose from the crowd. Nathan was hitting his stride now, moving around the machine like a seasoned showman. "Watch this," he said, climbing up into the operator's seat with considerably less grace than he'd intended. His expensive shoes slipped slightly on the metal steps, but he recovered quickly. "Henderson, fire her up!" The plant manager pressed a series of buttons on a tablet, and the AgriMaster 3000 hummed to life. Lights blinked in sequence across its control panel, and several monitors flickered on, displaying scrolling data that looked impressive to anyone who didn't understand what it meant. "You see," Nathan called out over the gentle whir of the machine, "traditional farming relies on guesswork and generations of—" The humming stopped. The lights went out. The screens went black. For a moment, the only sound in the warehouse was the distant buzz of fluorescent lights and someone's child whispering loudly, "Mommy, why did it break?" Nathan's confident smile faltered as he frantically pressed buttons on the control panel. Nothing happened. Henderson rushed forward with his tablet, tapping the screen like his life depended on it. "It's probably just a minor glitch," Nathan announced, his voice betraying the first hint of panic. "These machines are so advanced that sometimes—" "Sir, we've got a problem," Henderson whispered urgently, though in the dead silence of the warehouse, everyone heard him clearly. "The system's completely crashed. None of the diagnostics are responding." Nathan climbed down from the machine, trying to maintain his composure while his mind raced. This was supposed to be a simple demonstration for a bunch of farmers and factory workers. The story would get back to the corporate board. CEO shows off revolutionary technology to rural community, wins hearts and minds, stock price rises. Instead, he was about to become the punchline of a very expensive joke. "Let me call the tech team," Henderson muttered, pulling out his phone. "How long will that take?" Nathan hissed. "They're based in Atlanta. Even if they could walk us through a remote fix, we're looking at least an hour, maybe two." Nathan looked out at the crowd, which had gone from politely interested to clearly amused. A few of the plant workers were trying not to smirk. The children, meanwhile, had lost all pretense of politeness and were openly giggling. This was a disaster. "Folks, what we're experiencing here is actually quite normal for advanced technology," Nathan announced, falling back on corporate speak. "Complex systems sometimes require specialized maintenance protocols that—" "Excuse me, sir?" The voice was quiet, almost hesitant, but it cut through Nathan's increasingly desperate explanation like a knife through butter. He turned to see a teenage girl stepping forward from the back of the crowd. She couldn't have been more than 16 or 17, with natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and clothes that suggested she'd come straight from working outdoors. Her jeans were stained with what looked like motor oil, her boots were caked with mud, and her flannel shirt had seen better days. She looked like she belonged in a field, not in his high-tech demonstration. "Yes?" Nathan asked, his voice carrying just a hint of irritation. "Could I maybe take a look at it?" she asked, her tone respectful but confident. "I might be able to help." The silence that followed was so complete that Nathan could hear his own heartbeat. This girl, this child, was offering to fix a piece of equipment that his company's best engineers had spent 3 years developing. Equipment that was currently stumping both him and his plant manager. Someone in the crowd snorted with barely suppressed laughter. Nathan felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger. Bad enough that his miracle machine had broken down in front of an audience. Now some farm kid was volunteering to show him up. But then he looked at the crowd again and saw something that made him pause. The adults weren't laughing at the girl's offer. Instead, they were watching with interest, and a few were nodding encouragingly at her. "What's your name, young lady?" Nathan asked, his tone now more curious than annoyed. "Layla," she replied simply. "Well, Layla," Nathan said, spreading his arms in a gesture that he hoped looked generous rather than desperate. "I suppose there's no harm in letting you take a look. After all, fresh eyes sometimes see what experts miss, right?" The crowd chuckled at this, though Nathan suspected they were laughing more at him than with him. As Layla walked toward the machine, Nathan noticed something that made him frown. She didn't approach it the way most people did, with the cautious reverence that complex technology usually inspired. Instead, she moved around the AgriMaster 3000 like she was greeting an old friend. "What do you think you might be able to do that our engineers couldn't?" Nathan asked, unable to keep a slight condescending tone out of his voice. Layla didn't answer immediately. She was running her hands along the machine's exterior panels, her fingers moving with the practiced confidence of someone who understood what she was touching. "Well," she said finally, looking up at him with eyes that seemed much older than her years. "I guess we'll find out." Nathan crossed his arms and stepped back, giving Layla room to work while simultaneously making it clear he expected this to be nothing more than an entertaining sideshow. Henderson stood beside him, tablet in hand, looking like a man watching a child attempt to perform surgery. "Take your time," Nathan said with exaggerated patience. "We'll wait while you figure things out." But Layla wasn't paying attention to his sarcasm. She had dropped to her knees beside the machine, and was examining something near the base that Nathan hadn't even noticed. Her movements were methodical, almost ritualistic, as she traced her fingers along what appeared to be a series of connection points. "Sir," Henderson whispered, "should we really be letting her mess with a $300,000 piece of equipment?" Nathan was about to answer when Layla spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the warehouse despite its quiet tone. "The problem isn't in the main processor," she said, not looking up from her examination. "It's in the auxiliary power coupling. Whoever installed this unit didn't account for the humidity differential between the factory floor and storage." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't confused silence or amused silence. This was the silence of people who suddenly realized they were witnessing something unexpected. Henderson's tablet nearly slipped from his hands. "How could you possibly know that?" Layla finally looked up, her expression matter-of-fact. "Because when moisture gets into the secondary relay housing, it creates a feedback loop that tricks the system into thinking there's a catastrophic failure. The computer shuts everything down to protect itself." Nathan felt his mouth go dry. Those weren't the words of someone guessing or showing off. Those were the words of someone who understood the machine's design from the inside out. That's actually a known issue with this model," Henderson admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not supposed to happen unless the humidity is above 70%, and today it's only—" He glanced at his tablet, then back at Layla with wide eyes. 68%, Layla finished for him. "But the sensor calibration is set for sea-level atmospheric pressure. We're at 800 feet elevation here. The differential throws off the readings by about 3%. The crowd had gone completely silent now. Even the children had stopped fidgeting, sensing that something important was happening even if they didn't understand what. Nathan found himself stepping closer, his corporate composure cracking. "How do you know all this?" Layla didn't answer. Instead, she was carefully removing a panel that Nathan hadn't even realized was removable. Inside, he could see a complex array of circuits and connections that looked like the nervous system of some electronic creature. "The fix is simple," she said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out what looked like a small metal tool that Nathan didn't recognize. "You just need to bypass the faulty sensor temporarily and reset the power coupling sequence." Her hands moved with stunning precision, making adjustments to components that Nathan couldn't even see clearly from where he stood. She worked in silence for perhaps 2 minutes, though it felt like an hour to everyone watching. Then she stood up, wiped her hands on her jeans, and looked directly at Nathan for the first time since she'd started working. "Try it now," she said simply. Nathan looked at Henderson, who was staring at Layla like she just performed a miracle. The plant manager's hands shook slightly as he activated his tablet and pressed the startup sequence. The AgriMaster 3000 hummed to life. Not the tentative, uncertain startup they'd had before, but a smooth, confident awakening. Every light came on in perfect sequence. Every screen displayed exactly what it was supposed to display. The machine didn't just work, it purred like a contented cat. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Some of the plant workers were whooping and laughing, while parents hugged their children and pointed at Layla with obvious pride. But Nathan barely heard the celebration. He was staring at the girl who had just accomplished what his team of engineers said would take hours to diagnose, let alone fix. "That was impressive," he managed to say, though the word felt completely inadequate. Layla shrugged, a gesture so casual it almost seemed insulting given what she'd just done. "It wasn't that hard once you know what to look for." "But how did you know what to look for?" Nathan pressed. "This machine, it's proprietary technology. The specifications aren't public. Even most of our own employees don't understand how the power coupling system works." For the first time since she'd approached the machine, Layla hesitated. Something flickered across her face, not uncertainty, but the look of someone deciding how much truth to reveal. "I guess I'm just good with machines," she said finally. Nathan knew that wasn't the whole truth. People didn't just happen to be good with machines, in the way Layla had just demonstrated. What she'd done required intimate knowledge of the AgriMaster's design, the kind of knowledge that came from being involved in its creation or having access to technical documentation that was supposed to be top secret. As the crowd began to disperse, people congratulating Layla and shaking her hand, Nathan found himself studying her more carefully. There was something about her confidence, about the way she'd approached the machine, that nagged at him. "Layla," he called out as she started to walk away with what he assumed were her parents, a quiet-looking black couple who had watched the entire scene with expressions of proud but unsurprised satisfaction. She turned back to him. "Maybe we could talk sometime," Nathan said. "About your mechanical aptitude. We're always looking for talented people." Layla smiled for the first time since he'd met her, but it wasn't the smile of a teenager flattered by adult attention. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret. "Maybe," she said. "But I don't think you're ready for that conversation yet." Then she walked away, leaving Nathan standing next to his perfectly functioning machine, wondering what the hell had just happened. That evening, Nathan sat in his hotel room, the only decent accommodation within 50 miles of Millbrook, staring at his laptop screen with a glass of whiskey growing warm in his hand. He tried to focus on quarterly reports, board meeting preparations, anything that would help him forget the afternoon's events and get back to the familiar rhythm of corporate life. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Layla's hands moving across the AgriMaster's components with impossible familiarity. The girl had known things that even some of his senior engineers didn't know. Hell, she'd identified a humidity sensor calibration issue that hadn't even made it into the official troubleshooting manual yet. That kind of knowledge didn't come from being good with machines. It came from being involved in the machine's development, or having access to proprietary technical documentation that was supposed to be locked away in secure servers. Nathan drained his whiskey and picked up his phone. "Henderson? It's Nathan Blake. I need you to do something for me." "Of course, sir. What can I help you with?" "That girl today, Layla. I need to know everything about her. Who she is, where she comes from, how she knew what she knew." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sir, is there a problem?" "I mean, she helped us out of a pretty embarrassing situation." "That's exactly the problem," Nathan said, beginning to pace the cramped hotel room. "Teenagers don't just happen to know advanced agricultural technology troubleshooting. Either she's some kind of prodigy who's been studying our patents in her spare time, or there's something else going on here." "I'll ask around," Henderson promised. "But sir, this is a small town. People here don't usually appreciate outsiders poking into their business." "Then be subtle about it." "But I want answers." Nathan hung up and returned to his laptop, but concentration was impossible. Instead, he found himself pulling up the Agritech employee database, though he wasn't sure what he was looking for. The next morning brought Henderson's call earlier than Nathan had expected. "Sir, I've got some information about the girl, but it's kind of strange." Nathan was instantly alert. "Strange how?" "Her name is Layla Carter. She lives about 10 miles outside town with her father on a small farm. Nothing fancy, they grow some vegetables, keep a few animals, mostly keep to themselves." "And the father?" "That's where it gets interesting. His name is Elijah Carter, and according to everyone I talked to, he's something of a mystery. Moved here about 15 years ago, bought the land with cash, and has barely spoken to anyone since. People say he's polite enough when you run into him in town, but he makes it clear he values his privacy." Nathan frowned. "What does he do for work?" "That's just it. Nobody seems to know. He doesn't farm commercially, doesn't have a job in town, but somehow he's never seemed to struggle financially. And here's the weird part, 3 different people told me he used to work with machines but couldn't tell me what kind or where." "Work with machines?" Nathan repeated slowly. "What kind of machines?" "That's what I asked, but nobody had details. Just that he was supposedly some kind of engineer or inventor before he moved here. But sir, when I mentioned the name Elijah Carter, something felt familiar. Like I'd heard it before somewhere." Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. The name did sound familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Send me everything you've got on him. Full name, when he moved there, property records, anything. Already compiled it. Sending it to your email now. Nathan spent the next hour going through Henderson's research, but it only deepened the mystery. Elijah Carter appeared to have materialized in Millbrook 15 years ago with enough money to buy 40 acres of farmland outright. Before that, there was virtually no paper trail, no previous addresses, no employment history, no credit history going back more than 16 years. It was as if the man had simply decided to erase his past and start over. But it was the timing that made Nathan's blood run cold. 15 years ago was 2010. And 2010 was the year that Agritech Solutions had acquired the small startup company that had developed the core technology behind the AgriMaster line. Nathan pulled up the acquisition files, documents he hadn't looked at in years. The startup had been called Greenfield Innovations, and it had been founded by 3 partners who had developed revolutionary precision agriculture technology in a garage in Georgia. He scrolled through the old contracts and partnership agreements, looking for names, looking for anything that might connect to a man named Elijah Carter. And then he found it. Buried in a list of original patent holders, in technical documentation that had been largely forgotten after the acquisition, E. Carter, co-founder and chief technology officer, Greenfield Innovations. Nathan stared at the screen, his heart hammering in his chest. Elijah Carter hadn't just worked with machines. He had invented the machines. The core technology that had made Agritech Solutions into a billion-dollar company had been created by a man who was now living anonymously on a small farm in rural Georgia, and his daughter had just demonstrated intimate knowledge of systems that her father had designed. But that raised an even more disturbing question. If Elijah Carter had been a co-founder of the company that created Agritech's most valuable technology, why was he living in obscurity? What had happened during the acquisition that had made him disappear? Nathan pulled up the acquisition records again, this time reading them more carefully. The purchase price had been substantial, $50 million for a company that had barely existed for 2 years. But as he read through the details, he noticed something odd about the ownership structure. According to the final documents, Greenfield Innovations had been wholly owned by 2 partners at the time of sale. But the earlier documents clearly showed 3 co-founders. Somewhere between the company's founding and its acquisition, one of the partners had been removed from the ownership structure. E. Carter's name appeared on the original patents and the early incorporation papers, but by the time Agritech had bought the company, he was gone. No buyout agreement, no resignation letter, no explanation at all. He had simply been erased from the company's history, as if he had never existed. Nathan closed his laptop and stared out the hotel window at the rural landscape beyond. 15 years ago, his company had acquired technology that had made them hundreds of millions of dollars. Technology that had been created, at least in part, by a man who now lived in poverty while Agritech's executives collected massive bonuses. And that man's daughter had just fixed their machine with knowledge that should have been impossible for her to possess. Nathan reached for his phone again, but this time he wasn't calling Henderson. This time, he was calling the one person who might be able to tell him what had really happened 15 years ago, Marcus Webb, the lawyer who had handled the Greenfield acquisition and was now Agritech's general counsel. Marcus, it's Nathan. I need you to pull some old files for me. The Greenfield Innovations acquisition from 2010. Everything you have. That's ancient history, Nathan. Why the sudden interest? Just pull the files, Marcus. And I want to know about a man named Elijah Carter. He was apparently one of the original founders, but his name disappears from the records before we bought the company. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough to make Nathan wonder if the call had dropped. Marcus? You still there? Yeah, came the reply, but Marcus's voice had changed. Gone was the casual confidence, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. Nathan, that's not a name you want to be asking about. Why not? Another pause. Because some secrets are better left buried. Nathan felt his stomach drop. Marcus, what the hell does that mean? It means you need to drop this, Nathan. Right now. Some stones are better left unturned. I'm not dropping anything. Nathan said, his voice hardening. I'm the CEO of this company, and I have a right to know about our corporate history. Now tell me about Elijah Carter, or I'll find someone who will. The silence stretched so long that Nathan thought Marcus might have hung up. When the lawyer finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Meet me in my office tomorrow morning. Early. And Nathan? Don't discuss this with anyone else until we talk. The line went dead. Nathan spent a sleepless night in the cramped hotel room, his mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. By 6 a.m., he was already in his car, driving the 3 hours back to Atlanta with a lead foot and a growing sense of dread. Marcus Webb's corner office on the 32nd floor of Agritech Tower usually radiated success and confidence. But when Nathan walked in at 8 o'clock sharp, the normally immaculate lawyer looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His usually perfect silver hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd slept about as well as Nathan had. Close the door, Marcus said without looking up from a stack of manila folders spread across his desk. And sit down. This is going to take a while. Nathan had never seen Marcus look so defeated. The man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals with the confidence of a shark was now handling the folders in front of him like they might explode. Tell me about Elijah Carter, Nathan said, settling into the leather chair across from Marcus's desk. Marcus finally looked up, and Nathan was shocked to see something that looked almost like guilt in the older man's eyes. Elijah Carter was the most brilliant engineer I've ever met, Marcus began slowly. And 15 years ago, we destroyed his life. The words hit Nathan like a physical blow. What do you mean, we destroyed his life? Marcus opened the top folder and turned it around so Nathan could see the contents. Inside were photographs, technical documents, and what looked like financial records dating back to 2008. Greenfield Innovations wasn't just some startup we acquired, Marcus continued. It was going to revolutionize agriculture. And Elijah Carter wasn't just a co-founder, he was the visionary behind it all. Every major breakthrough, every innovative design, every patent that made us billions of dollars, it all came from his mind. Nathan leaned forward, studying the documents. He could see Elijah's signature on dozens of patent applications, technical specifications that clearly showed his handwriting, and correspondence that painted a picture of a man who was passionate about using technology to help small farmers compete with industrial agriculture. So what happened? Why did he leave the company? Marcus's laugh was bitter and humorless. He didn't leave, Nathan. We forced him out. Why? Because Elijah had ideas that scared the investors. He wanted Greenfield to remain focused on helping small and medium-sized farms. He wanted to keep the technology affordable, to license it at cost to family farmers who were struggling to compete with industrial operations. He talked about community ownership, about democratizing access to advanced agricultural technology. Nathan was starting to understand, and he didn't like where this was heading. The investors wanted to maximize profits. Exactly. When Agritech came calling with a $50 million offer, the other two founders saw dollar signs. But Elijah refused to sell. He said the technology was meant to help people, not make rich companies richer. Marcus pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the first. So we found another way. The documents in this folder made Nathan's blood run cold. Legal briefs, court filings, and corporate maneuvering that painted a picture of calculated destruction. We challenged his ownership stake. Marcus continued, his voice flat and professional, as if he were discussing a routine business transaction instead of a man's life. The other two founders claimed that Elijah's contributions were less significant than originally documented. They brought in expert witnesses who testified that his patents were obvious extensions of existing technology. We buried him in legal fees and tied up his assets in court proceedings. Jesus Christ, Nathan whispered. It took 18 months, but we broke him. Elijah spent every penny he had fighting to keep his stake in the company. He mortgaged his house, borrowed against his future, spent his daughter's college fund on legal fees. And in the end we won. Nathan looked up from the documents, feeling sick. How? We offered him a choice. Sign over his ownership stake and accept a settlement that would cover his legal debts, or face criminal charges for allegedly stealing proprietary technology from his previous employer. Charges we both knew were fabricated but would have been expensive and time-consuming to fight. He took the settlement. $500,000 for technology that we knew was worth hundreds of millions. The agreement included a comprehensive non-disclosure clause and a non-compete that effectively prevented him from working in agricultural technology ever again. Nathan stared at the papers in front of him, trying to process what he was hearing. His company, the company he led, the company he was proud of, had been built on a foundation of corporate theft and legal intimidation. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. "More?" The non-disclosure agreement wasn't just about the technology. It was about his existence. We required him to agree that Agritech could remove his name from all public records related to Greenfield Innovations. Patent filings, corporate documents, press releases, everything. As far as the official history was concerned, Elijah Carter never existed. Nathan felt like he was going to be sick. We erased him. Completely. And we made sure he could never tell his story. The NDA included provisions that would have resulted in financial penalties that would have bankrupted him if he ever spoke publicly about what had happened. So he disappeared. Took his settlement money, changed his name slightly, from E. Carter to Elijah Carter, and vanished into rural Georgia. For 15 years, he's been living quietly on a small farm, watching the technology he created make other people wealthy while he grows vegetables and raises his daughter in obscurity. Nathan leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd just learned. The AgriMaster 3000, the technology that had made Agritech an industry leader, the patents that generated millions in licensing fees every year. All of it had been stolen from a man who had wanted nothing more than to help farmers. And now his daughter has inherited his knowledge, Nathan said slowly. Apparently so. And Nathan, if she knows what we did to her father. Marcus didn't need to finish the sentence. Nathan understood perfectly. If Layla Carter knew the truth about her father's past, if she understood how Agritech had built its empire on stolen technology and destroyed lives, she had the power to bring the entire company down. The girl who had fixed their machine with impossible knowledge wasn't just mechanically gifted. She was a walking time bomb. Nathan drove back to Millbrook that same afternoon, his mind churning with everything Marcus had revealed. He told himself he was returning to tie up loose ends from the planned visit, but the truth was simpler and more terrifying. He needed to know how much Layla Carter knew about her father's past. The girl who had fixed his machine with impossible expertise was no longer just a curious anomaly. She was potentially the most dangerous person his company had ever encountered, someone who possessed both the technical knowledge to expose Agritech's stolen foundation and the personal motivation to destroy everything they had built on her father's work. Nathan found himself parked on a dirt road outside the Carter property as the sun began to set. Through a gap in the trees, he could see a modest farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a small barn, and fields that looked more like a large garden than a commercial operation. It was peaceful, quiet, and completely at odds with the high-stakes corporate drama that had brought him here. He was still trying to work up the courage to approach the house when he heard a soft tap on his passenger window. Layla Carter stood beside his car, looking exactly as she had the day before, jeans, flannel shirt, work boots, but her expression was different. Gone was the polite deference of a teenager addressing an adult. In its place was the steady, knowing gaze of someone who had been expecting this visit. "Mr. Blake?" she said as he rolled down the window. "I wondered when you'd show up." Nathan's mouth went dry. I wanted to thank you again for your help yesterday." Layla smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "No, you didn't. You wanted to figure out how I knew what I knew. And now that you've talked to your lawyer friend Mr. Webb, you're probably wondering what I'm planning to do with what I know." The blood drained from Nathan's face. "How do you know about your conversation with Marcus Webb?" "Because my father taught me to be prepared, Mr. Blake. We've been watching Agritech for 15 years, waiting to see if anyone would ever come looking for the truth about what happened to E. Carter. Nathan felt like the world was spinning around him. Get out of the car, Layla said calmly. It's time you met my father. Nathan's hands shook as he turned off the engine and stepped onto the dusty ground. Layla led him toward the farmhouse without saying another word, her confident stride making it clear that this was her territory now, not his. The man who opened the front door was not what Nathan had expected. Elijah Carter was tall and lean, with graying hair and the weathered hands of someone who worked outdoors, but his eyes held the sharp intelligence of the engineer he had once been. He wore simple clothes, jeans and a work shirt, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity that made Nathan feel underdressed despite his expensive suit. "Mr. Blake," Elijah said, his voice calm but cold. "Please come in. I believe we have a great deal to discuss." The interior of the farmhouse was simple but comfortable, with bookshelves lining the walls and what looked like technical journals scattered across a well-worn coffee table. But what caught Nathan's attention immediately were the blueprints and schematics covering one entire wall, detailed technical drawings that he recognized as the original designs for Agritech's most valuable patents. "I see you recognize the work," Elijah observed, following Nathan's gaze. "I've spent 15 years refining these designs, improving on the technology that you've been selling as your own innovation." Nathan found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You kept working on it?" "I never stopped working on it," Elijah replied. "Just because your company stole my life's work doesn't mean I stopped caring about the problems it was meant to solve. The difference is, I've been working to make the technology better for farmers, not more profitable for corporations." Layla had been silent during this exchange, but now she stepped forward, pulling a tablet from a bag Nathan hadn't noticed her carrying. She handed it to him, and his heart nearly stopped when he saw what was displayed on the screen. It was a comprehensive technical document, hundreds of pages detailing not just the original AgriMaster designs, but advanced improvements that went far beyond anything Agritech had ever developed. Modifications that would make the machines more efficient, more affordable, and infinitely more beneficial to small-scale farmers. "This is just a sample," Layla said quietly. "We have documentation going back 15 years. Every improvement, every innovation, every breakthrough that Agritech has claimed as their own since the acquisition, we can prove it all originated here, in this house, with my father." Nathan stared at the tablet, his mind reeling. "How is this possible?" "Because unlike your company, we actually care about advancing agricultural technology instead of just profiting from it," Elijah answered. "And because Layla has inherited not just my knowledge, but my passion for using that knowledge to help people. I've been learning these systems since I could walk," Layla added. "Every circuit, every sensor, every line of code. My father made sure I understood not just how the machines work, but why they were created and what they were supposed to accomplish before your company corrupted that vision." Nathan looked between father and daughter, finally understanding the full scope of what he was facing. "What do you want?" "That's the wrong question," Layla replied. "The question is, what are you prepared to do to make this right?" She took the tablet back and swiped to a new screen, a detailed analysis of Agritech's financial statements over the past 15 years, showing exactly how much profit the company had generated from Elijah's stolen technology. "We estimate that Agritech has made approximately $800 million in direct and indirect revenue from my father's innovations," she continued. "Technology that he was paid $500,000 for under duress and legal threats." Nathan felt sick. "You want compensation. We want acknowledgement," Elijah corrected firmly. "We want the truth about what happened 15 years ago to become public knowledge. We want my name restored to the patents I created. And we want Agritech to commit to the original vision of making advanced agricultural technology accessible to farmers who need it, not just profitable for shareholders who want it." Layla stepped closer to Nathan, her young face serious beyond her years. "You have a choice, Mr. Blake. You can work with us to set the record straight, acknowledge what was done, and help us build something better. Or..." She didn't finish the sentence, But she didn't need to. Nathan understood perfectly. Or you'll expose everything. We have documentation that would not only destroy Agritech's reputation, but likely result in criminal charges for corporate fraud, patent theft, and conspiracy, Layla confirmed. We have copies of internal communications between your board members during the acquisition. We have evidence of the fabricated charges used to coerce my father. We have everything, Mr. Blake. Nathan looked around the modest farmhouse, at the brilliant man who had been systematically destroyed by corporate greed, at the teenage girl who held the power to bring down a billion-dollar company. What happens if I say yes? He asked quietly. For the first time since he'd arrived, Layla's expression softened slightly. Then maybe we can actually build something worth being proud of. Nathan spent 3 sleepless nights in his Atlanta penthouse, staring out at the city lights and wrestling with a decision that would define not just his career, but his character. The files Marcus had shown him lay spread across his dining table like evidence in a trial where he was simultaneously the judge, jury, and defendant. On one side was everything he had worked for, his position as CEO, the respect of the business community, the financial security that came with running a billion-dollar corporation. On the other side was a truth that could destroy all of it, wielded by a teenage girl who had every right to demand justice for her father. But it wasn't really a choice at all. Deep down, Nathan knew what he had to do. The board meeting 3 weeks later was unlike any in Agritech's corporate history. Nathan had called it under the pretense of discussing strategic initiatives and corporate responsibility. But the 12 board members who filed into the conference room had no idea what was coming. Before we begin, Nathan announced, I'd like to introduce 2 special guests. The boardroom door opened, and Elijah Carter walked in, followed by Layla. Father and daughter had dressed for the occasion, Elijah in a simple but well-tailored suit, Layla in a professional dress that somehow made her look both older and more formidable than she had in her farm clothes. The reaction around the table was immediate and telling. 3 board members, including Marcus Webb, went pale. The others looked confused but curious. Ladies and gentlemen, Nathan continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. I'd like you to meet Elijah Carter, the co-founder and chief technology officer of Greenfield Innovations, and his daughter Layla. Mr. Carter is the man who invented the core technology that built this company. The silence that followed was deafening. Board member Patricia Henderson, who had joined the company only 5 years ago, spoke first. I'm sorry, Nathan, but I don't understand. Our acquisition documents show that Greenfield was founded by 2 partners, not 3. That's because we erased him from the record, Nathan replied, his words hitting the room like a physical blow. 15 years ago, this company used legal intimidation and fabricated criminal charges to force Elijah Carter to sign away his ownership stake for a fraction of what his technology was worth. Then we systematically removed his name from every patent, every document, every trace of his contribution to what became our most profitable product line. Marcus Webb stood up abruptly. Nathan, I strongly advise you to stop talking immediately. This conversation could have serious legal ramifications for. Sit down, Marcus, Nathan said quietly. The time for protecting corporate secrets is over. Elijah Carter stepped forward, his presence commanding despite his quiet demeanor. I'm not here for revenge, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. I'm here because my daughter convinced me that there might still be a chance to turn this company into what it was supposed to be. Layla moved to stand beside her father, and when she spoke, her voice held the same quiet authority. We're offering Agritech a chance to do the right thing. Full acknowledgement of my father's contributions, restoration of his name to all relevant patents and corporate documents, and a commitment to making our technology accessible to the farmers it was designed to help. And if we refuse? Asked board member Robert Kim, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Then tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in the country will receive a comprehensive package detailing Agritech's corporate theft, along with internal communications that show deliberate conspiracy to defraud a business partner. Layla replied calmly. We have everything. Recorded phone calls, email chains, financial documents, witness statements. Everything needed to prove that this company was built on stolen technology and destroyed lives. The room erupted in urgent whispers and barely contained panic. Nathan let the chaos continue for a moment before raising his hand for silence. "I've already made my decision," he announced. "Effective immediately, Agritech Solutions will publicly acknowledge Elijah Carter as co-inventor of our core agricultural technology. His name will be restored to all patent filings and corporate documents. We will establish the Carter Innovation Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million, dedicated to making advanced agricultural technology accessible to small and medium-sized farms." "Nathan, you can't make unilateral decisions like this," Marcus protested. "The board has to vote." "The board can vote to remove me if they want," Nathan interrupted. "But this is happening regardless. The alternative is watching this company collapse under criminal charges and civil lawsuits that will make our legal fees from the Greenfield acquisition look like pocket change." One by one, the board members who had been present 15 years ago began to nod their reluctant agreement. They had no choice, and they knew it. 6 months later, Nathan stood in the same warehouse in Millbrook where this whole story had begun, but everything was different now. The Agri-Master machines rolling off the production line bore a small but prominent label. "Core technology developed by Elijah Carter, Greenfield Innovations." More importantly, these machines were being sold at cost to qualifying small farms, funded by the Carter Innovation Foundation that had grown well beyond its initial endowment as ethical investors flocked to support Agritech's transformation. Elijah had declined Nathan's offer to return to the company in any official capacity, preferring to remain on his farm while serving as an advisor to the foundation. But his influence was everywhere, in the redesigned machines that prioritized efficiency over profit margins, in the training programs that taught farmers to maintain their own equipment, in the open-source philosophy that had replaced corporate secrecy. Layla, however, had accepted a different kind of role. The old maintenance shed behind her father's house had been transformed into a state-of-the-art innovation lab, funded by Agritech but operating independently. There, she was developing the next generation of agricultural technology, innovations that would make her father's original vision look conservative by comparison. Nathan visited the lab often, officially to check on the foundation's investments, but really because he found Layla's work inspiring in a way that corporate quarterly reports had never been. She was building machines that learned from farmers instead of replacing them, systems that strengthened communities instead of concentrating wealth, technology that solved problems instead of creating dependencies. "You know," Nathan said during one of these visits, watching Layla explain a new soil analysis system to a group of local farmers, "I used to think business was about winning, about being more successful than the competition." Layla looked up from her work, her hands still covered in grease from the prototype she'd been adjusting. "And now I think maybe it's about building something that matters more than you do." Layla smiled, not the knowing, secretive smile she'd worn that first day, but something warmer and more genuine. "My father always said that the best technology is technology that makes itself unnecessary. Machines that teach people to be better at what they already know how to do." Nathan nodded, watching the farmers examine Layla's latest creation with the kind of engaged curiosity that no amount of corporate marketing could manufacture. The girl who had once threatened to destroy his company had instead saved it, not from financial ruin, but from something worse. She had saved it from meaninglessness. And in doing so, she had proven that some legacies are too powerful to be buried, and some truths too important to stay hidden. The machines hummed quietly in the background, no longer symbols of corporate dominance, but tools in service of something larger than profit. Something worth building. Something worth being proud of.